And what we find over time is that those that have better institutions measured by Economic Freedom of the World indices, by the Fraser Institute, Cato, Heritage, there's a number of them that are out there. What they show is that those countries that tend to have stronger property rights, the rule of law, they're the ones that continue to thrive, whereas those that don't tend to collapse. Hello, welcome to this week's economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. It's been a delightful week. Things are getting warmer. It was actually over 100 degrees last week near Austin, Texas, where I'm at. I was up in DC for a few days for the Abundance Institute event, also some meetings on the Hill. So a lot of good things going on. And I wanted to bring across some of that to you today, but I want to do it in a little bit different way. I think that when we think about how to make a sense of inflation, what's government overreach, or why housing costs keep climbing, all the things that are on our mind right now, what I would argue is it all comes back to basic economics and the principles of economics, ideas that are too often ignored by those crafting the laws that shape our lives. So this week, what I want to do is I'm going to kick off a new Econ 101 series to reconnect the fundamentals of economics with everyday issues that we all face. These aren't abstract theories. They're tools for protecting prosperity. So I'm going to explain what economics really means today, why strong institutions and secure property rights are the foundation of economic growth, and how bad incentives and broken systems have left our economy in a fragile state. Remember, you can catch the full episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, go to Substack, all the different places where I'm at, and be sure to try to become a supporter of my work as well. I'm always taking donations and other money for helping out to provide information about free market economics and ways to better let people prosper. So let's get to it, all right? Number one, what is economics? Well, economics is a study of human action and interaction within institutions to satisfy desires given scarce resources. It's not about just money. It's about choices. Every decision we make involves trade-offs because our time, money, and energy are limited. Now, if you think about real-world examples, you can choose whether to buy groceries or fill up your gas tanks. Really, that trade-off is economics. When government sends stimulus checks and prints trillions of dollars, people might feel richer temporarily, but with more dollars chasing the same goods, prices rise. That's inflation. Scarcity forces all these choices. That's why we must evaluate the opportunity cost when we give up, when we choose one thing over another. Too often, we only look at the direct cost. We've got to look at those opportunity costs as well. I think that's really, if you've taken an economics class, you didn't learn about opportunity cost, then you missed something. You should have been in my class instead. And I love teaching economics and learning more about economics because to me, it's much broader than the stock market or the bond market or housing prices and everything else. It's really about, like I said, the human action and interaction, going together to see how people work together to fulfill their desires and be more productive and living a better life overall. I think without economics, we'd be in a much worse situation at the end of the day. Of course, religion, the Bible, those are things that have even more power than economics. But I think economics has a lot of power that really brings in a lot of different subjects. For example, I was big into accounting when I was an undergrad. I was big into psychology, sociology, history, political science. And to me, when I started learning more about economics, it helped me to realize about the exchanges that were taking place. So now whenever I see anything about economics or see things in the marketplace, I often refer back to economics and how supply and demand come together and how beautiful that is that we oftentimes just overlook or take it for granted too often. Even in relationships, there's supply and demand. In politics, there's supply and demand. And we've got to make sure they understand that they have these rational actors that are going to go on, which I'll have a whole episode about, but they're making decisions to improve their lot in life, or they will not make those decisions. And as a social scientist, I can't have a natural experiment, or it's very difficult to do that, to just say, I'm going to control people's behavior. I don't want that anyway. I want more liberty. But whenever you think about how these things come together and how the only way that I know whether or not you acted was that you acted or didn't act, then that makes you rational, given your situation. I may come and say, well, what I think about how you acted and the way you did and the outcomes indicate that it was irrational behavior, but that's from a third party. after the fact of the action that was made. So in that particular action that you've taken, that would be a rational decision. And we make rational choices all the time. Now, the outcomes may not be exactly what we want, and that's because of these trade-offs. The scarcity that's involved, we may not always make the best decisions, and that's okay. That's still rational, but it's something for us to learn from over time. Game theory has a lot of good insights on this. So understanding these trade-offs is key to designing policies that actually help people, not trap them in dependency or distort the market. Let's stop blaming quote unquote greedy corporations for inflation and start blaming the real culprit, too much government and too much money printing by the Federal Reserve. I just think that this part is so important to really understand the true meaning of economics. It's being thrown around so much nowadays with conservative economics, progressive economics, Keynesian economics, and so forth. But I think when you really start looking into what economics really means, and the way that I've learned it over time, I think has been a combination of the Austrian school, which I think does a great job explaining the principles of economics, along with some of the math behind it, and even more of the explanations from the Chicago School of Economics, where Milton Friedman's at, or was. Those are the types of thinking that I'm going to continue to convey in my work here and in the research that I do for many clients and will continue to do. All right. So number 2, why do institutions matter? Well, when you're thinking about institutions, these are the rules of the game, formal or informal, that guide our behavior and determine outcomes. Strong institutions create environments where people feel secure enough to take risks, build in businesses, and invest in their future. Really institutions, you think about them as buildings and infrastructure and stuff like that, but it's much more diverse than that. The institution of marriage, the institution of a family. I mean, these are institutions in some sense because it's bringing people together and how they act within that marketplace, within that institutional framework. And when we're able to observe and see how that works, then you can see what the outcomes are going to be. And what we find over time is that those that have better institutions measured by Economic Freedom of the World indices, by the Fraser Institute, Cato, Heritage, there's a number of them that are out there. What they show is that those countries that tend to have stronger property rights, the rule of law, they're the ones that continue to thrive, whereas those that don't tend to collapse. Venezuela once prospered until it became a socialist dictatorship. In the U.S., the Federal Reserve and Congress are institutions. When the Fed manipulates interest rates or Congress overspends, they distort incentives and erode trust in markets. Trust is so important, not only in our relationships, but in our families, but in markets. Just think about this. When you're driving down the road in your car and you're on the freeway, right? There's a supply and demand of the road. You're not going to take up the entire road or even the width or the length. So there's a lot of room that you can maneuver around. So what do? You see where you're at right now. You don't really like where you're at. There's a car in front of you, so you can't go as fast as you otherwise would. And you think, all right, well, was there any other supply of road that I can go into? If you look to the right, there's somebody already there. You're in the middle lane. And so you look to the right, somebody's already there. So the price is too high. You don't want to wreck them. And you don't want to wreck the person in front of you. You don't want to stop because somebody's going to wreck you in the back. So you look to the left. Well, there's an opening. That's the supply. The price is lower, and I'm going to improve where I'm at. And so that institutional framework within the rules of the game of just the road and this freeway that you're on allows you to move into a place that you're going to be better off. And you trust people around you in your car that they're also not going to wreck into you and do something else that's going to raise that price. And I think it really illustrates how markets work all the time and how much trust we put in people, even when we don't often realize it. And that's the case because of a lot of the opportunity costs and the direct costs that are priced into that marketplace. All right. So we really need our sound money and limited government spending. These are institutional bedrocks of prosperity. It matters because when institutions ignore limits, they weaken liberty. That's what we're seeing today with unchecked spending, loose monetary policy, and regulatory overreach undermining American resilience. And those are more macro issues. Even when you break it down and you think about these sort of institutional frameworks, whether it be religion, whether like churches and synagogues, things of that nature, you can think about these as 3 big circles is the way I like to put it. Peter Bedke used to do this as well. That's where I learned it from. But you have social, economic, and political institutions. And each one of those institutions, social institutions, the family, churches, synagogues, how we're coming together in some communities in some capacity. You have the political institutions, which are your republic or democracies or dictatorships, things of that nature, just political things. And then you have your economic institutions of the businesses and the marketplace and everything else. When they come together and they lap, like a Venn diagram, where they all three overlap, is kind of the sweet spot to where they're coming together. The problem is that when you have too much government, it crowds out the circles, if you will, of the economic and the social institutions. And when those start to break down, when we're too reliant on government in politics and things of that nature in the political scheme of corporate welfare, it distorts. It reduces the amount of prosperity we're going to have. And that is why economics is another reason why economics is so important. Number 3, private property and the free market. So private property rights are the foundation of a free market economy. When you look back to what Adam Smith talked about, Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, it always goes back to private property rights as being so essential. When individuals can own, control, and exchange property, they have the incentives to work, invest, and innovate. Without secure ownership, there's no accountability or incentive for stewardship. And that's a problem. When you look at environmental issues, a lot of those people will say, well, you need more government. But usually it's because of a lack of private property rights. That's not a way to come in and take care of, conserve the land that God's given us, right? So some other real world examples are zoning laws and environmental regulations. They often limit how people use their land, stalling development, and contributing to the housing affordability crisis. The more restrictions you put on building, the less property rights people are able to have. Therefore, you're going to have less housing available to people. Therefore, higher prices. Eminent domain abuse by governments and excessive property taxes reduce your sense of ownership, turning homeowners into renters of their land. If you really don't own it and the government does, you won't invest in it as much. That's true for individuals, families, and businesses. A healthy economy depends on people knowing they can reap the rewards of their labor and investments. That's why I advocate for eliminating property taxes in Texas and elsewhere to promote true ownership and economic dignity. When you don't have those things, we can't have a well-functioning economy, and you're losing out on the prosperity that we otherwise could have. And my goal is to let people prosper. And so I want people to be able to own their property, whether it's their house, whether it's a second mortgage, a second house, a rental unit, wherever it is, we should be able to own these things. And it's one reason why I think a sales tax is better than a property tax, because property tax you pay year after year after year, so you really don't really own the house itself. Whereas without a sales tax, even if it was on property or a house, then you pay it once and you'd be done. They may pay it off over time in your mortgage or something else if you didn't have that kind of income, but at least you would know how much it was going to be without being jacked up over time. But also whenever you buy something like a Snickers bar, if you had to pay a property tax on that every year, if you just kept it laying around. But instead, if you pay a sales tax, you buy it once and then you get to choose where you want it to be. Every tax is extortionary, but I think there are some that are better than others. All right. Number 4, applying economic principles today. Too many current policies ignore these principles of economics, and it's hurting us. Tariffs are taxes on Americans, not foreign governments. Trump's trade war and Biden's continued protectionism have raised prices, hurt supply chains, and reduced growth. Look, at the end of the day, free trade benefits everyone, whether it's with you and your spouse or your partner, whether it's you and your kids, whether it's you and the grocery store. This trade adds value, or you wouldn't trade. I mean, there's this mutually beneficial exchanges that take place. And understanding economics helps you to really think through the talking points and the superficial stuff that we hear and see, but instead gets to the crux of the arguments. So if you ask consumers who enjoy affordable goods or businesses that access global supply chains, they're going to say they do. They love this stuff, right? So at both the federal and state levels, government spending is growing faster than the economy and taxpayers' ability to fund it. This is why I've been working so hard with the Americans for Tax Reform and others on the Sustainable Budget Project that shows that if Congress had limited spending growth to the rate of population and inflation since 2015, we'd have spent $2.2 trillion less last year alone, saving us much money in debt and taxes and inflation and everything else. You know, as Friedman said, it's not how much you tax, it's how much you spend. And even when you look at Texas passed a record high $337 billion budget, which looks to be going through here soon. They failed to deliver universal school choice and missed another opportunity to phase out school M&O property taxes. That's not sustainable. Policymakers just remember, prosperity isn't fueled by bigger budgets. It's fueled by productive people in a free economy with less government, not more government. So my final thoughts are for you today is that economics is everywhere. It shapes every decision, every policy, and every paycheck, whether you know it or not. That's why I launched this new Econ 101 series, not just to explain the theories, but to equip you to better understand today's headlines and tomorrow's solution. Let's stop blaming markets for government failures. Let's stop saying prices are too high without understanding why. And let's stop demanding more spending when the real solution is spending less. Because if we want to let people prosper, which you know I do, and I hope you do too, we must start with the truth. Prosperity comes from freedom, not force, from production, not politics, and from markets, not mandates. Please check out the resources that I put at the bottom of the show notes page for this one, where it talks about Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, Economics for Real People by Ginn Callahan, and a whole bunch of others like Why Government is the Problem by Milton Friedman. Don't miss those links, all right? Remember, you can find all this and much more at vanceginn.com, and go to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com to get the links to more information on this and even my syllabus where I taught economics to a number of folks based on this. Economics can seem way out there sometimes, but it really is about understanding people. Join me in this as we continue to talk about economics and so much more. And God bless you. Let people prosper.